Chapter 8, 72 Hours. Back in New Orleans and frightened for Gabriella's life, Madeline bypassed the elevator and raced across the courtyard and up the stairwell to her apartment. The helplessness she felt on the flight back from Chicago had been agonizing, and although she'd called the house multiple times to check on Gabriella, there had been no answer. Already dark, the 3 flights of stairs seemed endless as every possibility flashed through Madeline's mind, none of which was positive. The past 24 hours had been a constant tug-of-war between Madeline's conflicting emotions regarding Gabriella's return to her life and the death of her brother. After 5 years of navigating the hardships of the healing process and attempting to rebuild a shattered life, Madeline had finally found strength in the adversities of her past. Now, after only 1 day, everyone and everything she had so adamantly eradicated from her conscious mind had ricocheted back with striking force. When she reached her front door, she found it closed but unlocked and the alarm deactivated. She left explicit instructions for Gabriella on how to operate the security system, and this discovery only aggravated her level of concern. When she entered the apartment, every room was dark except for a hint of flickering television light coming from the end of the hallway. Witnessing the gruesome details behind her brother's death at East Penn had drastically altered Madeline's state of mind, and she decided to proceed with caution and protection. Madeline now knew her parents posed an imminent threat to her life, and continuing to hide in denial was no longer an option. She had dedicated the past 15 years to preparing for the day she might be forced to face them again, and it was time to put her training to use. Without hesitation, her survival instincts subconsciously clicked into action. She kept a second silver-plated Colt .45 semi-automatic handgun in a holster secured to the underside of the entryway table. She quietly removed the gun, slowly opened the top drawer, and pulled out and expertly loaded the clip. As Madeline moved cautiously through the parlor and down the side hall with the gun held securely at her waist, her breath became steady and she was prepared to use it. When she reached the end of the hallway and proceeded into the kitchen, the smell of burning food engulfed her nostrils and the sight in front of her halted the investigation. The entire house was trashed. The kitchen utensils were in disarray, food was scattered all over the countertops, and several pots boiled over on the stove burned and black. The fire alarm began beeping loudly as Madeline dashed to the stove, turned off the burners, and ran into the living room where she found Gabriella. Gabriella was unconscious and hanging halfway off the couch, dressed only in a tank top and panties, covered in vomit. Empty bottles of alcohol were strewn all over the floor.
"Not again!" Madeline screamed, rushing to Gabriella and checking her pulse. It was faint, her skin hot and sweaty. Madeline looked over to the coffee table and saw several open bottles of prescription pills with Gabriella's name on them. The blaring fire alarm turned into howling sirens.
Madeline sat in the lounge of New Orleans City Hospital's emergency room, poring through the details of Maxwell's file while awaiting an update on Gabriella's condition. She had never seen or read anything like it. Years and years of a person's life lost in the disorganization of a prison's poorly kept record system. It was nothing like the meticulously kept paperwork she maintained for her patients, and she had to piece the details together page by page before she could make sense of anything. The most provoking section was the transport logs detailing the times Maxwell had been in and out of East Penn during his incarceration. He had appeared at a Chicago courthouse for more than a dozen appeal hearings, which had ended the same month their parents stopped visiting him. The file didn't reveal any of the details of his case, only the transfer records for processing between East Penn and the Cook County Jail for holding. The name of his lawyer was also missing from the file, as Maxwell had retained private counsel and not a court-appointed attorney like the one he had for his first trial. How could Maxwell afford the retainer and monthly billings, Madeline wondered. He was broke. She put the file into her backpack and continued to wait. Madeline was extremely distraught over Gabriella's overdose, and hours had gone by without word from the hospital staff. The last Madeline had heard, Gabriella was in critical condition with her stomach being pumped, and Madeline's distress was quickly turning into fear-driven rage. Their parents' resurfacing was creating a fatal domino effect, and Madeline decided it was time to either disappear again or fight. What either choice would entail, she did not yet know, but she needed to assemble before the end of the night and knew exactly who to seek for help. After receiving an update on Gabriella, that was the first place she would go. Meanwhile, she still had work to do outside her personal plights. Her financial and personal needs had just doubled, and someone had to finance the impending storm. With Gabriella immobilized, it was Madeline's responsibility to do it. She looked at the missed calls list on her cell phone and saw Dr. Fields had unsurprisingly been trying to reach her all night. "Lovely," she said, dialing her voicemail and playing the messages. The sound of Dr. Fields' coarse voice snarled at her over the recording. "What happened to you today?" he screamed. "This is outrageous. You had better make it in to see your new patient tomorrow, or I swear it's over for you." The last person Madeline could afford to cross at that point was her boss, despite her plethora of private struggles. His flagrant flirtations were hard to bear, but Dr. Fields was big time in the world of child psychiatry, and Madeline was still his resident. He currently held sole authority over the future of her career. In an era where professionals of every kind jumped onto the bandwagons of reality television and personal exploitation, Dr. Fields' methods of self-promotion could compete with the best of them. His literary agent had been looking for a publisher for his book on childhood schizophrenia for a year, and his invitation to give the keynote address at the conference gala nearly ensured a large advance and a fully funded deal, which was not only good news and international exposure for him, but also for every doctor working on his team. With or without Gabriella, Madeline refused to give up what she had built. Her research findings and methods of treating undiagnosed patients alone would put New Orleans on the psychiatric map. She would have to ease any tension existing between herself and Dr. Fields, but not tonight. She put her phone away, pulled out the file he'd given her the day before on her new patient, and looked through the previous doctor's notes. Savannah DeVeers, age 17, she read quietly. Multiple suicide attempts, overdosing on medication while under psychiatric care, and a history of cutting. Nothing uncommon. Why does he want me to have this case? She closed the file, thinking, Harry loves to play his sick little games. I'm sure this is no different. The reality was, every time Dr. Fields found himself with writer's block, he tossed one of his resident doctors a case so convoluted they would have no chance of solving it. He told them afterward it was to keep them guessing and alert, and then secretly put the results into his book. Plus, he liked to keep his doctors under his control, which he achieved by keeping them mentally and emotionally out of control. He was a cold, calculated leech who fed off other people's struggles. After 2 more hours of waiting, the emergency room nurse arrived with an update on Gabriella. "Miss Knight," she said. "Dr. Knight," Madeline corrected. Madeline knew she looked young for her age and wasn't in the mood for a runaround. She wanted the facts about Gabriella's condition, not the usual brush-off given by nurses already overworked and understaffed. "I'm sorry? Dr. Knight, your sister is currently under sedation as her blood alcohol content was dangerously high at 31%. Obviously, combined with her medications, this overdose could have been fatal. We're going to keep her in ICU overnight. But she should be fine." She should be fine, Madeline thought. She should be dead with those numbers. I'd like to go in and check on her. What room is she in? She's in treatment room number 4. Thank you. Can you please send down the on-call psychiatrist? Yes, doctor. Madeline walked through the double doors separating the waiting room from the emergency center and down the corridor past the trauma units into the treatment rooms. She pulled back the blue curtain to room number 4 and peered in. Gabriella was hooked up to multiple IVs, a breathing tube, and a catheter. Madeline was grateful she was under sedation. What a mess, Gabriella. What were you thinking? Madeline said, sitting down on the chair next to the bed. She blamed herself. Gabriella had a history of incidents resulting in hospitalizations more life-threatening than this, and the responsibility Madeline had always felt for Gabriella played at her conscience. Gabriella is right about one thing, she thought. All we have is each other. I'm not going to allow her to end up like Max. Madeline retrieved a plastic bag out of her backpack full of the medications she had collected from the coffee table. She knew how her sister worked. Once released, Gabriella would be completely uncontrollable again. Madeline needed to know the circumstances under which Gabriella had been discharged from the psychiatric facility in Illinois. But for the moment, Madeline's top priority was keeping her sister safe. She looked across the hallway at the emergency psych holding rooms and formulated a plan. I'm going to figure out what's really going on here, she whispered to Gabriella. You're not getting out of here for at least 72 hours. You'll be safe from our parents and from yourself. A doctor wearing a white coat over a suit and tie opened the curtain and entered the room. He was 39 years old, 6 feet 6 inches tall, slender and in shape with slightly tanned white skin. If it wasn't for his poorly selected wardrobe and disheveled disposition, Madeline thought he might have actually been attractive. Instead, his medium-long, slightly greasy dark blonde hair was pulled back into a low ponytail, he was unshaven, and his eyes were hidden behind noticeably smudged glasses. But he was hopelessly mesmerized by Madeline the moment he saw her. Hello, I'm Dr. Nathan Raines, the on-call psychiatrist this evening. You asked to see me? Yes, Madeline said, rising to greet him. I'm Dr. Madeline Knight. I'm a resident over at New Orleans State Psychiatric Hospital in the children's ward. My sister was brought in this evening, Gabriella Jackson. Dr. Raines was struck senseless. A doctor and she's beautiful? No way, he thought, unable to stay on topic. You must be working under Harold Fields then. I did my residency with him. Yes, actually, she replied, uninterested in his personal affairs. Anyway, I found her passed out on the floor when I came home this evening. I'm assuming that you'll be attending his keynote address at the gala this Thursday night? Yes, doctor, but back to the point. I don't think this was just an overdose. She has a history of this type of behavior. It was a suicide attempt, and I need you to place her on an involuntary 72-hour psychiatric hold. She was just discharged from an out-of-state inpatient facility. I found these. She handed him the bag of pills. He couldn't keep up with her. Wow, okay. Yeah, you've got it. Can you get me her other medical records? Yes, as soon as I can. Thank you, doctor. I've got to go. Goodbye. Madeline pulled back the curtain and left, closing him in behind her. Before he could make sense of the enigma he'd just witnessed, she had already strutted off down the corridor and out the exit doors, leaving him stunned and stimulated.